teaching honest or true history to your kids. So why did I pick this topic? Well, you've been watching the news as we speak. The enemies of God and the enemies of truth are tearing down statues. And this is just a culmination of what's been going on for several generations. We've had universities that have taught biased history with an anti-God agenda. That goes all the way back to the 1960s, but it keeps on getting more severe every year. The government, public schools, and most history textbooks, they've been teaching the anti-God version of history since I, was in school. The media, the History Channel, National Geographic, and PBS, and many others.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I got to cut down the noise there. Have been teaching the anti-God version of history for generations now. And you and myself, as parents, we've probably been subjected to this anti-God version of history and have been, to one degree or another, we've been influenced and maybe even deceived by it. So history matters. The gospel is history. It's called the good news. It's a report of events that happened in the past. The vast majority of its content of the Bible itself is history. All history testifies to the truth of God's word. The popularity of Marxist ideology today, like the Antifa and AOC and Bernie Sanders and social justice and Black Lives Matter, etc., it's all the fruit, the bad fruit of teaching false, lying history. And your kids need the truth to prevent themselves from being decepted and to be able to speak the truth to others. They need a foundation. And again, I want to point out this is an age-appropriate thing that you're going to hopefully be able to take away from what we're going to discuss tonight and apply it age appropriately to your own kids. So the kids, but they need a foundation. It's like, I don't think it would be wise to wait until high school to try to address these issues. We can lay some foundation at a very early age in their teaching of history. You, their teacher, need to know the true history, to internalize it. And this is, for years I've been praising the principal approach concept of education, which is basically the teacher internalizes, understands, gets, full of knowledge on a subject, and then imparts it. So hopefully, I have some suggested books to help do that. But that's one of the goals of this talk tonight, is to help you fill up your tank with truth about history, especially in these areas that are under attack. So in this teaching tonight, we're going to examine some of the lies currently being taught. There's no way we could cover them all in several teachings. But most of the false or lies taught in history take the form of false narrative. So what do I mean by false narrative? It's an explanation or a story that's full of deception. False narratives contain sometimes fragments of truth. A lot of times, we know that from Satan's strategies and temptation. A partial truth can cause a lot of problem because we might be, okay, I know this is true, but when it's mixed in with a lot of lie, it can cause great deception. So a lot of these false narratives do contain fragments of truth. Many, for the most part, they're sweeping generalizations. Many times they are gapping omissions of information, historical fact. Frequently, they're full of gross exaggerations in order to persuade in a certain direction. Their selection, it's selective reporting. They're picking and choosing the facts that they want to include in their narrative. And their interpretation is very, very biased. So those are just some of the mischief that's wrapped up in a false narrative. When examined in the light of the facts, we can see an anti-Christian, anti-Bible, anti-God agenda in the way history is taught today. These false narratives are vicious in their attack on Christianity. At its root, it's spiritual war. The source of the animosity toward God, Christianity, and the Bible is Satan himself. And he's got many useful idiots at his disposal and many willful collaborators who share Satan's hatred for God and truth. Part of that strategy is the multiculturalism agenda. And I assume, you've heard that before. You're maybe more familiar with it than I am. But I probably first taught about multiculturalism back in the 1990s, early 90s. And I remember then teaching at ACSI to Christian school teachers. A lot of them were very resistant to explaining multiculturalism in the way I'm going to do it here again. Multiculturalism to a lot of people means appreciation of a variety of cultures. It means open-mindedness. It means a certain kind of tolerance. But bottom line, the agenda of multiculturalism is none of these things. So the strategy of multiculturalism agenda, it claims all cultures are or should be accepted as equal. Believing, according to this agenda, believing or declaring one culture is better than another is racist. But the problem with that is reality shows that cultures can be compared. For example, life expectancy, poverty level, education level, degree of freedom allowed, health and disease frequency, literacy rates, and on and on and on. Numerous categories can be where cultures can be compared, and the cultures can be ranked in any of these categories. Obviously, the literacy rate in Malaysia compared to the literacy rate in Sudan it's measurable. And so you can say, when it comes to literacy, Malaysia is superior to Sudan. Some cultures are better than others when compared in any of these categories. The greatest factor that shapes a culture is the worldview of the people. And the greatest factor that shapes the worldview of the people is their view of God or gods. In other words, their religion. Multiculturalists do not want to accept the God of the Bible. That's the bottom line. Their contention that it's wrong to call one culture superior to another is really their contention that it's wrong to call one religion superior to another. The truth is that cultures based on the biblical worldview do surpass other cultures that are not based on the biblical worldview in virtually all of the important categories of comparison. When compared to cultures not based on the biblical worldview, cultures based on a biblical worldview usually have more freedom, more prosperity, better health, better education. Sorry. Longer life expectancy, and just in general, more contentment. But the multicultural agenda does everything it can to suppress this truth.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Everything's going great. Just want to let you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hey, by the way, I didn't say this earlier, but anybody who has any comments or questions, feel free to jump in at any time. I don't have a overload of content tonight, so I'm not going to be talking for an hour and a half myself. And there's no, reason to shorten things by, expecting that you won't interrupt. You're invited to interrupt. Okay, let's see. One thing the multiculturalism agenda does is it suppresses the truth about the depravity of paganism. Excuse me just a second. Honey, I can hear that. I can hear all that. We can't do it. So multicultural agenda suppresses the truth about the depravity of paganism. So if you want to make all cultures look equal, you definitely got to do some covering up for no other adjective really is accurate than to call some of these cultures in the world depraved. And that's the truth of it is explained in Romans 1. And I'm not going to go over that whole passage again, but just a couple verses. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the mortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For centuries, people particularly in the Western world, have understood this, that when a culture abandons belief in the God of the Bible, immorality follows, corruption follows, depravity follows. In cultures that have never been exposed, or at least in recent years or generations, to the gospel, are by default, they're going to be depraved. So one of the big lies is that this presenting history, showing these primitive cultures as somehow innocent, blissful, happy people. is absolutely inaccurate, and it has never been presented that way until the Enlightenment and in recent modern centuries. Today, telling the truth about the depravity of paganism is called racism. For example, the Aztecs were depraved, savage, massive use of human sacrifice. And I'm going to recommend some books. One of them, hope maybe you guys can see me even though I can't see you, is a book by John Eidsmoe, Columbus and Cortez, Conquerors for Christ. And he has all kinds of really good primary sources that give the descriptions that the Spaniards wrote about when they first encountered the Aztecs. And the modern Hollywood horror movies don't come close to the reality of these human sacrifices where they literally cut hearts out of living people while the hearts were still pumping to sacrifice for the gods by the thousands. And there's many other examples. This was common knowledge in past centuries. The idea it was understood that Christian people were civilized. Pagan people tended to be savage. They use words like savage, barbaric, brutal, wild. You get thrown in jail for using those words today, but they aren't politically correct at all. But they are accurate. When you go back before political correct censorship ruled the roost in the production of history textbooks, you could see that. You read missionary accounts of their encounters with some of these primitive tribal people, and they had to lock everything down or it'd get stolen. I don't want to go. I could get lost in describing some of this depravity. It was common knowledge, commonly understood, and it was in the history books of the past. It's a very inconvenient truth for the multicultural agenda. And so now it's censored, it's revised, and the modern multicultural ideology has replaced factual, truthful evidence. But, this is a note here. Even though, we've escaped most of that by homeschooling, we need to challenge the politically correct censors. I mean, thank God for the homeschool curriculum that's based on truth. But we homeschoolers, we can't crawl into a cocoon because the whole rest of the country, 90% of our youth are attending public schools, and they're being indoctrinated with this politically correct, multicultural, anti-God history. And they're the ones that are going to vote. They're going to have control of America's politics, government, education, and ultimately censorship. It's like if we don't fight the war out there, it's going to end up in our backyard. And we really do need to support, for example, Bunny's sister Julie serves with the Child Protection League, and they're fighting the whole transgender ideology, and it's mainly in public schools and Minnesota lawmaking that affects government schools, but we'd be foolish to think it isn't going to. Once they gain that territory, we're going to be next. So anyway, so let's look at some of the false narratives. Any thoughts or comments up to this point?
I can hear all of the counter arguments as you're talking. Not that I really want to give more airtime to the arguments, but the arguments I can hear is, I mean, obviously, ultimately, for me to be able to defend, for any one of us to be able to defend this position, we got to have, I suppose, we got to research the evidence of the depravity and the paganism in history. We really got to understand that in various examples. We need. Do you have any rather than give airtime to the counter arguments? Because I mean, I can hear people telling me about how the Americans treated the Indians, about chattel slavery, the KKK, Jim Crow laws, segregation, police brutality, white supremacy.
Right.
Rather than give airtime to all those things, obviously those things are bad, but because we're being recorded, I need to say that. I mean, if we weren't being recorded, everyone would already know that we understand those things are bad, but not giving airtime to that, I think, can you recommend any text? You already did recommend a text about Columbus and Cortez conquers for Christ as an example of the depravity and paganism. Is there anything else you can recommend that goes broadly into contrasting, Western Christian kind of civilization and to paganism?
Yeah, I do. And they're in my notes and they're coming up shortly, and
Okay.
I'll put them on the screen when I get there. Tonight, I'm only going to hit a couple of these false narratives. In the future, I may be doing some more of this and on other subjects. I'm going to hit the slavery one tonight and a couple others. If it seems like it's helpful to the church, I'd like to do some more in the future. And then I would probably have some more reading recommendations on those topics as we get there. So, any other questions or comments? So, false narratives. Modern folks, especially youth, are willing to accept false narratives, which much more readily than in past generations would. So this isn't just a information or knowledge issue, it's a character. It's also a character issue. Matter of fact, maybe it's by and large or primarily a character issue. In other words, there's a vulnerability or a willingness to absorb these lies and believe these lies and even favor these lies. So let me make the case here that one of the reasons false narratives are gaining influence is because the character of this current generation or the last few generations has flaws. The modern culture is becoming increasingly irrational. I mean, wow, who in their right mind can't see the irrationality of defund the police? I mean, it's just, for someone my age, what's going on in the news today is like, are you kidding? Are you kidding me? These people are asking for these are totally unreasonable, irrational demands. I'm seeing this as, matter of fact, in the last 5 or 10 years, it's just the rate of descent into irrationality has seemed to totally accelerate beyond the speed of sound. Self-centeredness is emphasized. So, this is some of the characteristics of the culture in 2020 that was different in the 1950s when I grew up. Self-centeredness is emphasized. Subjectivity is emphasized over objectivity. Opinion is more important than fact. Self-expression is more important than self-respect, or not self-respect, or respect for others. For example, we dress, I keep on harping on this one, we dress to express ourselves. Whereas my generation, we were taught to dress to, depending on who we were going to be with, to respect them. Particularly a church. That was a place where you were gathered together to honor God. Innovation, creativity is, new ideas are emphasized over traditional thinking. We see this in art. Impressionist art is more, valued than realistic art. It's interesting. I don't know how many of you are familiar with PragerU. You can find it at a website by that name. I think a lot of it's on YouTube. But it's Dennis Prager's organization, and they have a bunch of little 5-minute videos on a whole bunch of these subjects that deal with current issues of the day. Black Lives Matter, things like that. I saw one recently that dealt with this very issue of art, and it made this point that the subjectivity, the self-centeredness of our current culture has emphasized this impressionistic art, and there's no standards anymore. There's no appreciation. There's no way you can even call some art better than others. And just another aspect of this environment that we're in these 21st century generations. A lot of that comes from modern psychology, which encourages, especially in parenting and classroom management, educational psychology, all the emphasis on self-expression, self-esteem. Just so, it's sickeningly centered on the individual, the child, and then it goes on into adulthood. Moderns are more interested in expressing their opinion than listening to the wise. Boy, there is a list of scriptures, particularly in Proverbs, a yard long of, advice on keep your mouth shut and your ears open. And then the social media effect. There's probably all kinds of stuff written and about this particular factor that social media has just increased this whole problem of, express yourself, get your opinion out there. Little sound bites, the Twitter generation, the fragmented little sound bite, no accountability. You can say anything and you blurt it out and walk away without any responsibility to back up your statement with evidence or logic or anything. And it's just caused an incredible explosion in this kind of attitude toward expressing ourselves and not caring, not listening, not appreciating, not valuing, not esteeming anything other than your own view. Few respect tradition, wisdom, age, the tried and proven, or any kind of authority. You've probably all seen the bumper sticker, resist authority. Doesn't matter what kind, any authority. Few care if there's evidence to support a statement. And that's why these narratives, are running rampant. I think a grade school kid in my generation would probably be less gullible because they were probably in their education, at least I can remember it that way. We were taught to, expect an explanation, expect evidence to support any kind of opinion or statement. And few care about the laws of logic, whether they're followed. So I'm saying that it's a character issue at its foundation. And so I'm going to give a few suggestions as first steps or foundational to teaching history to your kids. And the first step is training them in a right attitude. Okay? If they don't have the right attitude, and in general, all my experience with our church, with all my homeschool tutoring and so on, in general, the homeschoolers have done a great job at this. But I just want to emphasize it again, and I want to make the connection between right attitude and good learning and successful learning. So the right attitude, what does this include? It includes a respect for, so the first thing is respect. Respect for what? For authority. All kinds of authority, not just the one who wears the badge, but the one who knows, the one who has the experience, the one who has the expertise, even the one who has the credentials. All credentials aren't meaningless. To respect expertise, to respect knowledge, to respect experience, to respect age, to respect logic, to respect evidence. So, for starters, we want to get that in our kids. And like I say, this age appropriately, this goes all the way down to preschool. Humility. Right attitude includes humility. We, meaning this generation, we're not the greatest thing since sliced bread. Many before us have done great things. The modern history books are more concerned about the Beatles and Marilyn Monroe than they are about Thomas Edison and, you know, the great statesmen. America has a hall of fame of people who've done great things, and it used to be the history books emphasize that. So this is one thing you can do with, you know, especially with the little ones who aren't maybe not able to comprehend the timeline, cause and effects, you know, story of history, who might be more, you know, apt to learn from reading like little individual biographies and so on. You know, we need to learn to respect that those who came before us have done some great things. Just because modern technology is more advanced than ever doesn't mean that we're the smartest generation that ever lived. Previous generations were not unenlightened or stupid. Boy, I tell you, every time you turn around, the Antifa and the, you know, the Marxists are just tearing down the reputation of some American hero of the past. That book I mentioned about Columbus, you know, this will help straighten out the facts about Columbus and Cortez, two of the main targets of the Antifa. So there are many wiser, greater, smarter people that came before us that we need to have humility to appreciate. And a third quality, character quality of this, what I call a right attitude about learning history, is a love for truth. Kids need a healthy skepticism for unsubstantiated statements. I remember Summit, Jeff Myers always used to say, you know, well, you know, how do you know? What is your reason for believing that? Show me the evidence. And so it's an attitude issue. Another attitude issue regarding the love for truth is help our kids get in the habit of building a desire to know by what authority is your statement made. For example, as Christians, we should always want to know, does the Bible agree with what you're saying? And other authorities too, you know. So, and a third one in the area of love for truth is a willingness to accept inconvenient truth. As we go through some of these false narratives, there's some painful, inconvenient truth about what people have done in the name of Christianity that wasn't in sync with the teachings of the Bible. Christians have people, or at least people who call themselves Christians, have committed atrocities, have done some terrible things. That's inconvenient truth. And we need to really help develop a love for truth in the kids to the point where, okay, I was wrong. That we were wrong on that one. We're not going to cover it up just because it makes us look bad. It's interesting how the Bible does not do that. Some of the greatest heroes in the Bible, extremely embarrassing facts are revealed about them in the scripture. David's sin, Moses's, Timothy at times, different, all kinds of stuff. So first thing in this issue of training, a right attitude is these three. Secondly, in laying a foundation, I'm not going to go into it in any detail tonight, but it's important to teach your kids sound reasoning skills. And by that, I mean mainly traditional logic, and not so much the trendy, quote, thinking skills stuff that's out there today. I'm really not prepared to review or recommend curriculum on this area. I just trust Answers in Genesis, and I've mentioned Dr. Jason Lisle before and his logic, and the reason I like it because it's so biblically based. But it's research needs to be done. Let's put it that way on selecting any kind of curriculum that would strengthen your kids' reasoning skills. So maybe at some point in the future I can talk about that in a little more detail. And third, give them knowledge. It's like knowledge has been kind of thrown out. The 60s we started hearing things regarding the higher level learning skills and so on, and it was like you wanted children in the classroom to be able to argue and reason and so on, but you can't do any of those higher level thinking skills unless you have a base of knowledge, and so knowledge needs a comeback in education. We need to realize, it was interesting a few years, 20 years ago now, I was involved in setting up a Christian school out here in Stillwater, and a couple of the guys that were going to teach there had been raised in principal approach Christian schools, and they went to, St. Cloud State for a few courses, and on a couple occasions they expressed frustration. They said, man, I'm there and I'm still waiting for them to teach us something. Give us some information, give us some knowledge, because that's what they grew up with in a principal approach environment. And here, not just in lower education, but in university, the trend was all into analysis and quote higher level skills, and there was no knowledge. It's like I think I mentioned this before too. When I was a new teacher, this is before I got to know the Lord. Friday afternoon was like, okay, I'm tired. I've been teaching all week. So this is my 8th grade history class. Let's have a debate. What do you want to talk about? Okay, how about the Civil War? And so half the class supports the South, half the class supports the North, and you say, all right, go. And they argue. No information with which to argue, but it was, a lot of emotional catharsis. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that's kind of how education has trended. So appreciate knowledge. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go over a few of these narratives and try to inject some knowledge that can be helpful in combating the lies. Here's some of the false narratives currently being promoted. I'm just going to state them as narratives in their falsity, or whatever that word would be. One would be like, white European Christians came to America to steal the land and destroy the culture of the Native Americans. Or, white European Christians promoted racism, slavery, and oppressive colonialism. Or, the Christian church was or is oppressive, anti-science, anti-intellectual, and anti-women. Normally, you don't hear these narratives in a summary sentence like this. A lot of times they're in a series of claims, but when you put it together, it comes out like this. And that's very much what they want you to believe. Capitalism was or is unjust, oppressive, and has caused or causes social injustice and poverty. Or Islam was or is a peaceful religion. Or primitive cultures are innocent, peaceful, moral, and just. And many, many, many other false narratives. So here's my suggestion for tonight. We can only cover a limited number. I think I'm only going to do 3 tonight. So glean what you can. And like I say, I'm going to give you some more references. So, my suggestion is hopefully this will encourage you to educate yourself, do some reading, check out some good sources on the internet. Learn to detect the bias and be deliberate in injecting truth into your own teaching of history. The curriculum, maybe some of you use Apologia science curriculum. And I've never taught science with that kind of curriculum, but I've seen it and read it every once in a while. One of the things that I really liked about it was the author deliberately focused on some of the false narratives in science that are current today, like evolution for sure, global warming, things like that, So I've always done that in my classes, which are history, American and world, economics, government. And I've gone out of my way to confront these false narratives. So hopefully you can glean some stuff that will help you to do the same. So first of all, the biblical view of history. There's many ways to view history, and we need to think about history the way God does. many Christians do not view history biblical. You ever heard the phrase, you want to know why people do things? Follow the money. I've heard that from Christians and non-Christians numerous times. Is that a biblical view of history? No, absolutely not. That reflects a Marxist view of history, which is economic determinism. In other words, the motivation that causes people to take actions that create history is economic, following the money. So if you are a Christian, if you're talking that way, you're not talking biblically. Some other non-biblical views of history. Well, we mentioned Marxism, which is economic determinism, but his is based on Hegel. Hegel was the German philosopher that said history is constantly evolving. There's a consensus view that was called, he called a thesis, that in time oppositional views would arise, called antithesis. There would be conflict, and eventually a new view, or kind of a compromise view that he called a synthesis, would arise. And that this was constantly happening over and over in history. You have the synthesis becomes a new thesis, and then you have another antithesis. Marx picked up that idea, and he said, yeah, I like that, but the bottom line is it's a material. He called it dialectic materialism. It's a conflict over material wealth. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago when we talked about cultural Marxism. There's a pantheistic view, that's this Hindu or New Age view of history, and that is, instead of being linear like the biblical view is, that history starts and has a progression toward it is a narrative. The pantheistic view is it's basically a repetition that eternally repeats itself. Environmental determinism is another, the idea that and you know what, you might say, why am I even mentioning these? Because doggone it, too many Christians think this way. Environmental determinism, and which is really comes out of Darwinism, the idea that people behave in certain ways, and therefore history progresses in certain directions because of the environment. Cold climates, people work harder. Warm climates, they're lazier. Therefore, this, that, and so on. Okay, whatever. It's not biblical. And then postmodernism, we talked about that a few times away. Basically, a lot of that is a kind of a hodgepodge of Marxist and other historical views. But what's a biblical view? It's his story, his with a capital H. The record of God fulfilling his purposes in time. God is in complete control, and nothing can stop him from reaching his goals. History, and we see that when we look at the whole New Testament, it's a record of God successfully achieving what he set out to do. It's linear. It started somewhere and it's going to end somewhere. So let's examine some of today's false narratives that attack the truth. All right, false narrative, call it number one. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. And it was interesting, I'm on one of the Answers in Genesis email lists, and I got one the other day, and this was the title of Ken Ham's blog for that week. It said, the universe is 13.8 billion years old. No, wait, it's 12.6 billion years old. And he's making fun of the fact that the scientists constantly are changing their mind about the age of the universe. So they were only off by what, 1.2 billion years. But anyway, this is a huge false narrative, the age of the earth. Many Christians argue that the age of the earth is not a critical issue. They say it's not a salvation issue. Whether you believe in 6,000 years or 13.8 billion doesn't determine your eternity. Okay? But, and I don't think I want to use tonight to get into all these arguments, but if you take these 13.8 billion years, you erase an awful lot of historical events that are the foundation for theology that does introduce and explain the truth about how we get saved. Other objection of the old earth creationists is that the issue of the age of the earth causes unnecessary division in the church. Unnecessary division, you know. I'm throwing these out here because maybe you've heard them and maybe they even have some weight on you. Hopefully, you know, by the end of the evening, you're going to see that if that causes unnecessary division, the opposite of ignoring this causes way more harm. And that's what we're going to be talking about right here. And the other thing that sometimes is thrown out as an objection to making an issue about the age of the earth is that it impedes evangelism, because now Christianity is a bigger pill to swallow, because it says that it finds itself in conflict with, quote, modern science. Again, it's like, you know what? I have to follow what I see the Bible saying. And if people have a harder time, you know, accepting the Bible because of that, I can't take responsibility for it. Again, the damage it does of thinking in terms of 13.8 billion years is, in my mind, greater. Accepting, and here's why, accepting millions of years destroys respect for the historical accuracy of the Bible. The Bible clearly claims to be historical narrative. Secular science, then, if you take the old age view, is considered more authoritative than Scripture. And then the Bible gets relegated into the fairy tale category. And this attitude ends up infecting and infects thinking on the historicity of the Bible for the whole Bible. It's poisonous. It's dangerous. It's a slippery slope. So what I encourage you is teach your kids the importance of this issue. Teach them that history of thought about the age of the earth that Christians have held over the years, over the centuries. You know, who was Bishop Ussher? You know, he's the guy who computed through using biblical, what's the word I want? Not chronology, father, son, genealogy. He computed the genealogy and came up with 6,000 years since creation. In fact, he said it happened at, I can't remember what time of the day, 404 BC. Not just Bishop Ussher, but all kinds of Christian leaders, very well-respected Christian leaders throughout the centuries were young earth creationists. They didn't believe in millions and billions of years. Now, okay, I got a book I want to recommend, a couple of them here, all right? This one is one of my favorites. I literally read it twice. It's called The Long War Against God. Can you guys see that on the screen? I'll assume yes, that's a yes.
We missed the author. We missed.
Yeah, Henry Morse. Henry Morse, one of my heroes. He's basically he's the father of modern creation science, and it's a history of, it says here, the history and impact of the creation evolution conflict. But what he does is he shows how this conflict has gone on since the beginning of time. And he traces some of the viewpoints that leaders in the church took on the issue of the age of the earth over the centuries. And there's a modern version, actually skinnier book, called Creation Without Compromise. The author is Donald Crow. I got this one off the website, CMI, Creation Ministries International.
You got to raise that up next to your head, Dan, so we can see it. It's cut off at the bottom.
Okay. And he's got more quotes from.
Who is it by?
Donald Crow. And he's got more references to the Henry Morse book than any other author. But he goes into mainly what the Christian leaders have thought about the age of the earth, and he's very, very candid. He talks about certain Christian leaders, and this same thing is true today. A lot of Christian leaders that I have tremendous respect for when it comes to things like theology or worldview and so on, but they're wrong on this one. They're wrong on the age of the earth, and he does a great job of doing that. And it also, he tells it like it is. That I respect all these. Spurgeon, people like Spurgeon, wasn't firm on that whole thing, So anyway, those are a couple of books. Let me see. I got a couple more here. It's really it's not just interesting. It's very enlightening to see how the trend toward old Earth creation came, right before Darwin, when they were starting to talk about rockology. I'm losing my onboard dictionary in my head tonight. Okay. And let me give you a couple more. Those you want to hear about some books. Here's one Bruce gave me. Vishal Bhagwati. I don't know if you remember, he did a series on campus. I think it was at the church that just got sold about maybe 10 years ago. You probably can't read this title because it's so long. It's The Book That Made Your World. How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization. And Vishal is he's like just a guru when it comes. That's a poor joke for an Indian guy, but Vishal he's kind of a disciple of Francis Schaeffer. He spent time at the place in Switzerland that Francis Schaeffer had. And he really does a great job of explaining how the really good things that Western civilization appreciates or should appreciate all came from the Bible, all came from people who believed the Bible. And I'm going to make some points about that very thing. So that's a good one. And then one more, How Christianity Changed the World by Elvin Schmidt. And this isn't as scholarly as the shelf, but he's got a lot of the subjects in there that are being perverted by these false narratives today. He gives it the Christian side or the true side. So those are my book recommendations for tonight. So a second, or similar to the first anyway, false narrative is that ancient man was brute. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you spell Schmidt?
Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
Thanks.
Okay, another false narrative. Ancient man was brutish, unintelligent, unsophisticated. He's evolving and society is progressing toward a higher level of humanity. Again, you might not see that narrative in a single sentence statement, but it's definitely implied in practically every, it's almost a unanimously held assumption. And it completely distorts the true history of the human race. Completely distorts the true history of human race. Why? Because Romans 1 tells us it's the exact opposite. The Bible says man started knowing God and ignored God and became depraved. The evolutionist view, which is what this is, says the exact opposite. This assumption creates an attitude of arrogance about us, our generation, our times, and a patronizing disdain for people of the past. Newer modern thinking is considered superior to past thinking. This is, remember I was talking about, lay a foundation with your kids in a right attitude. Well, this is one of the areas where that'll be helpful, because there's tremendous arrogance in the current generation. Newer modern thinking is considered superior in every way to past thinking. There's this infatuation toward inevitable progress, progressivism, and the height of it, the Bible calls it the height of foolishness. There's all kinds of passages that warn us about thinking of ourselves as the greatest thing. For example, we saw this in Tim Mahoney's films. The Moses, right? Moses could not have written the first 5 books of the Bible. Why? Because people were too stupid to know how to read back in Moses' days. These are assumptions. They're assumptions based on these false narratives. Another example is this concept of progressive religion, or man is progressing in his thinking about God. The idea that, primitive man believed in many gods, polytheism. And then as he's progressed, he became a monotheist. And moderns now and in the future, they're going to progress further from monotheism to atheism. That's part of this thinking. We see it also in morality. Traditional patriarchal monogamy has evolved or progressed. That they call progress, particularly in the 20th century, where divorce, women's lib, abortion, was enlightened. Then we realized homosexuality was even a higher progression, and now we got transgender ideology. Whoa, it's like this is considered a trend upward. Teach your kids the truth about, quote, cavemen. You know, that's everywhere. That's in almost every textbook. You know, early man is a brute, carries his club, drags his woman by her hair, you know, eats raw meat, whatever. Um, well, thank God again for homeschoolers, because better curriculum is now available. For example, the Mystery of History. I'm going to just read you a little clip of a review by a Christian parent. He says, "The Mystery of History, Volume 1, Creation to the Resurrection, 3rd edition, is written from a Christian young earth perspective and teaches children to see God's hand through history." That's what we want. And that's not the only curriculum, but that's one of them. I know my daughter-in-law, Christine in Arkansas, uses it. And I'm going to even stick my neck out here and urge you to boycott curriculum that doesn't support the biblical view, even if it's in the homeschool and even Christian homeschool catalogs. One of them is The Story of the World by Susan Wise Bauer. She is a champion of classical education. Here's what a review of that says. By the way, a review that I have reason to agree with. Like many have also expressed, this curriculum, The Story of the World by Susan Wise Bauer, is engaging, and my children enjoy reading it as well as the activities. My problem with this material is that it does not address an accurate view of ancient man. To truly tell the story of the world from the beginning, I would expect the book to start with Adam and Eve and discuss the fall, the flood, and the dispersion of people groups from the Tower of Babel from a historical perspective. Story of the World instead starts with a, quote, primitive man mindset and evolutionary dating. Therefore, I cannot say I would recommend this resource. I know Answers in Genesis has a wonderful history curriculum. It's making noise, funny. Let's see. I know Answers in Genesis has a wonderful history curriculum, though it is for children in upper elementary through high school. This is something to think about if your kids are in that age range and you're looking for biblical history outline of the world. So, you know, some people might think, maybe some of you even think that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but I don't. I think it's important. I think, actually, I think classical education for some Christians can be a Trojan horse. In other words, it can allow into their thinking, to their curriculum, to their homeschool practices, ideas that are contrary to the Bible. This is an example of it. And I think there's probably others too. Okay, I'm going to move one. I got one more of these false narratives that we're going to spend a little more time in those first two. But before I do, I just want to see if there's any questions or comments on the.
Yeah, I actually want to.
Go ahead.
So the Story of the World is part of our curriculum through My Father's World. But what I really appreciate is they also have us using Answers in Genesis curriculum, and they intentionally have those two in there to teach kids to evaluate all of their textbooks through the lens of the Bible. And so we do have, you know, they'll say, you know, you need to look at what she has in these early sections of the book, compare them to the Bible, you know, let's look at Answers in Genesis and find out, you know, what really happened at that point. So, did you take him? There's boycotting, but there's also giving your kids the inoculation, the vaccination against the misinformation, and say, this is how we evaluate the things we're reading, and, think critically about what we're being presented.
Yeah.
Could you hear me?
Anybody else? Any more?
Oh, I like to say that the whole time here you've been saying the battle against against the Bible and against Christianity, but it's really broader than that. It's a battle against Western Christian civilization, which at its core is Christian. But I don't think people even know what Christianity means or stands for. But they know Western Christian civilization has to come down if they're going to be able to promote their own thoughts. The other comment I'd like to make is that if somebody, say, for example, is an old age creationist in part of a church like that, or saying they're a Christian in their old age, and you say, well, I'm young age and I believe in the Bible, I believe what the Bible says is literally true, then what they go to is they say, you're being disrespectful of me and my thoughts. And it's like, I'm not disrespecting you, I'm telling you what the Bible says and that I believe the Bible. It's not disrespect to disagree with you. But they will attack
Turned it
you.
into a personal conflict, right?
Right. They'll take it to a personal conflict, and it's not. It's a disagreement. And so it then becomes your kind of Christianity versus my kind of Christianity. And there's only one kind of Christianity, and Jesus Christ is Lord, but they won't give you the respect to have a different opinion. They instead will attack you for being disrespectful. And that's something I see come all the time. If you believe something different than what the old fundamentalist Christianity believes, you believe something different, and you express your historical belief in fundamental Christianity to them, then they think that you're being disrespectful to them, that you should shut your mouth. You should not be able to be part of this discussion. You should be able, because you see, you won't entertain their thought. You won't debate in the sense of discuss. They don't debate, because if it's logical debate, you tear them to shreds. But you won't enter into the discussion with them. You won't fellowship them in old earth. You won't fellowship. You won't communion. You won't have communion with them on their old earth concepts. You can't have communion with them because it's against what the Word of God says, And so they take that as you disrespecting them. That's what they say to you, and they'll attack you on it as being disrespectful. That you should be loving and kind and generous and open and give them room to be part of the body of Christ. They believe in abortion. Why can't you just accept that? They believe in old earth creationism. Why can't you believe that? They don't necessarily believe all the literal miracles of the Bible. Why can't you accept that? You can't enter into dialogue with me because you're disrespectful. It's disrespectful to disagree. So it's an amazing conflict. It's tough because they'll throw up a wall like Antifa. It'll be a wall like, I can't think, they have a name for it. I think it starts with C, to where you have to change. You must change. know, we are the future, and you must change. It's really quite disarming, and I'm sure that Parnell's run into it more than once. Might not have recognized it when it happened. It's been going on for ages, but it really is. You cannot disagree, because your disagreement is disrespect. Your disagreement says that you can't have fellowship, you can't have communion, you know, and really you can't. You know, what can I say? You can't have fellowship and communion. Yeah, I can't sit around and discuss the truth or falsity of old earth creationism. I have to just say, listen, by faith, I believe the Word of God, and that's where I'm at. I mean, what we're left with. We have to say, I believe the Word of God, and I can't debate this with you. Now, Henry Morris might be able to debate it with you, but I can't. I can just tell you I believe the Word of God, and to debate it with you is to entertain the fact that you might have some kind of nugget of truth that I've missed there somehow, you know, and I haven't missed. I've studied. I haven't missed that nugget of truth. I understand what you believe. I just tell you no. That's all. So anyhow, I find that attack of you're disrespectful. I find that to be very difficult. And I also want to say that the most of the people are not necessarily fighting directly against Jesus Christ and the church and cross and, you know, stained glass windows. They're fighting against Western Christian civilization, and they don't even know what it is that they're fighting against. They don't understand that they're wanting paganism. They don't get that. They don't know that look at Antifa. Starts off with supporting George Floyd and ends up shooting babies in the faces, burning buildings down and destroying livelihoods, and they don't understand that that's just a progression to paganism. They don't get that. They don't understand that it's a progression to the breakdown of civilization and society that's been maintained for years through law and order and through honor and respect of the process of history. There's really nothing to talk to them about. They don't have the ability to talk at a deeper level. They'll just parrot back to you the talking points that they've learned that reject Western Christian civilization that they've accumulated. So, I am into my rant.
Any more comments? All right, well, let's see. I want to tackle a big one here. Like I say, once we have the right attitude on these things, we do need knowledge. We do need facts to be able to defend or show the error. So I can hear that. Okay. So I want to talk about this big one, the false narrative. Christianity promotes slavery, or its corollary, Christianity promotes racism. Probably phrase it in a bunch of different ways, but essentially that's their intent, to slander Christianity by calling it pro-slavery or racist. Two things that, of course, are big no-nos in contemporary thinking. So if you can associate Christianity with it, you get a get a big lick against your protagonist. So, defining terms. Okay, one of the things that deception often relies on confusion of terms. And again, I go back to thinking about how Jeff Meyer used to talk about this in summit teachings. What do you mean by the term? What do you mean by the word? Liars depend on confusion. And so defining the terms is something they're not prone to do. For example, Christianity. So basically the narrative said Christianity promotes slavery or Christianity promotes racism. So by Christianity, what do you mean? Are you saying this is what the Bible teaches? Or are you saying what people who call themselves Christians do? Both are important. What if what the Bible teaches has no effect on people's behavior? The thing is, honest history shows that the teaching of the Bible does change the behavior of those who really believe it. And I think that's what Vishal's book is really dedicated to showing. But not everyone who calls himself a Christian really is a believer. We need to make the distinction between a nominal and a true believer. People who call themselves Christians yet do not follow the biblical teaching are the cause of much of this confusion. So, we're not just in a argument to defend our side and to cover up mistakes and sins and even atrocities. Like I said, I think part of our attitude means we need to be open to receiving inconvenient truth. But it has to start with defining terms. This idea that people who call themselves Christians do not follow biblical teaching. Well, we're going to see how that was huge in American history of slavery. But we can see it today. We can see it in contemporary example on the issue of homosexuality. Bible clearly calls homosexuality sin, but many liberal Christians and their churches welcome the gay agenda, the rainbow flags. The rainbow flags is basically saying we accept the gay agenda, which basically says approve homosexuality. We've got to, we're going to see how this also happened back in the issue of slavery. And then defining in terms. Slavery, what do you mean? What do you mean by slavery? Are we talking about the forced labor of Africans in antebellum, pre-Civil War America? Or are we talking about slavery as described and regulated by Old Testament Mosaic law? Because this is what's often done. They'll talk about how, the ancient Israelites, they had slaves. Well, again, it's like, stay away from the facts and you can keep this all mushy. But if you read the Bible, if you read the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and you study what it says about slavery, you find out that slavery as described and as it's regulated by Mosaic law in the Old Testament was nothing at all like the African slavery in America in the 1800s. In the Old Testament, Jewish, quote, I don't even know if they use the word slavery, was a system of economic security. Now, you may be listening to this and say, well, where'd you get that? And I guess if I was doing a really good job, I'd give you some verses and some chapters. Use your own, Bible study books. Sorry, I just don't have it. But it's there. It's there. the system of quotes, slavery was a system for economic security. It was a voluntary contract or agreement as a means to meet debt obligations. People entered or were sold into slavery to meet financial debt obligations. And in Old Testament law, it could never last more than 7 years. And it was highly regulated by Mosaic law. Slaves had rights. There's lots of stuff in the Deuteronomy and Leviticus that tells the people how to treat their servants. Matter of fact, it was a model for what became known as indentured servanthood that was used in Europe. Matter of fact, many people came to America through this voluntary agreement to serve a person for a certain number of years as a way to pay off debt. Nothing at all like the slavery in southern United States. Slavery in the southern United States was slaves were property. They had no rights whatsoever. It was permanent. It was often cruel, and it was racist. African slavery in America led to racism. Racism was used to justify slavery. Just talking about curriculum, I have an interesting piece of curriculum. Well, it's a textbook actually that I use in my classes, and it's a bunch of primary sources for the Knotgrass history called In Their Words. And one of the things that I like to have the kids look at that really shows that racism in America came after slavery in America, that racism was used as a rationalization to justify slavery. And there's a interesting article in here. I don't have time to read it tonight, but Alexander Stephens made a speech. It was recorded. He was the vice president of the Confederacy. And he, like many, many others in the South, called themselves Christians, but he gave this incredible rationalization to justify slavery by contending that Africans were unable to fend for themselves. They needed the white man to provide, their livelihood. They were not capable of managing their own lives. It was just absolutely blatantly racist. So this is one of the inconvenient truths. This, I assume, I don't know, I don't have document this here or not. We do know that people like Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, was supposedly a very devout Christian, but this rationalization was going on. The Southern Baptist Convention, what was that? That was the Baptist Church in America split during the years before the Civil War because the Christians in general, Christians understood slavery was at least the slavery as practiced in the southern United States was unbiblical, but the Southern Baptists partook in this rationalization where they bought into thinking like Alexander Stephens, and they rationalized that it was a good thing. So, I have this is one of those very, very inconvenient truths. I don't know. I don't know how to think about this, actually. I wonder if God's judgment of liberal Christians will be greater than on pagans, since these people were exposed to the Bible. But anyway, this is a terrible thing that happened. What is the Bible's teaching on slavery? Well, the anti-God multiculturalists and the antebellum Southern Christians, they say that the Bible supports slavery. Modern anti-God multiculturalists say the Bible accepts slavery because there are admonitions for slaves to serve their master in Paul's letters. Modern anti-God multiculturalists also say that the Bible does not advocate the abolition of slavery. Well, what's the facts? The Bible does not take up what the anti-God multiculturalists would call social justice cause. Okay, the Bible doesn't support ideas like systemic racism or white privilege or liberation theology, which is fundamentally Marxist. That's not biblical. Why? Because the Bible deals with justice on an individual basis. The Bible doesn't advocate rebellion or revolution, but here's what the Bible does do, and this is the important thing here. The Bible does give us principles from which we can draw conclusions about social practices. Important anti-slavery, anti-racist principles taught in the Bible. My goodness, people that, say that they got to be just, like those people that, who was it? I can't remember the situation where they covered their ears and shouted so they couldn't hear the truth. The Bible is so clear and full of anti-slavery, anti-racist principles. One, man is created in the image of God. All men are created we're all descendants of one couple, Adam and Eve. There is only one race. Love your neighbor as yourself. Care for the sick, the poor, and the captives. Much, much more there for all to see. Principles, moral principles that if we internalize, if we believe, if we trust, it's going to change our behavior and it's going to change the social structures. And that's exactly how it did work itself out in history. Historical records reveal that believers in the Bible ended the practice of slavery in lands where the Bible was accepted and believed and trusted. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and these are a couple of quotes that I pulled out of that book by Alvin Schmidt. So during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, according to Robin Lane Fox, that's another author he's citing, the early Christians were most numerous in the setting of urban households where freeing of slaves was most frequent. By the 12th century, slaves in Europe were rare. By the 14th century, slavery was virtually unknown on the continent. But in the 17th century, the slave trade was started again in the British Empire, supposedly a Christian nation. This is a terrible, inconvenient truth. What the British and American, quote, Christians, I got it in quotes in my notes, they succumb to expediency over principle. What could make some money doing, they decided, well, maybe the Bible didn't really mean this. And that's where we get all this rationalization. In spite of these failures by Christians.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
I just thought of something. I do believe in the New Testament, or it's the Old Testament too. I think it covers it, but I think in the New Testament specifically talks about slavers being like a serious sin, like you won't inherit heaven if you are for slave trade or something like that.
Yeah.
Specifically, like the trading is of slaves or the selling of slaves or something like that. If you are a slaver, I think in the New Testament it condemns it. I'll have to look it up.
You'd think that Paul talks too about a bondservant. You know that passage, right? You put a awl in a guy's ear and poke a hole in his ear because he decides to permanently commit himself as a lifelong servant of some beneficiary. So you'd think that the New Testament writers, they would see, they wouldn't probably consider it slavery, it would be servanthood. They would consider, okay, there's nothing in the Jewish practice of binding yourself to someone to pay an economic debt or arrange a social security kind of arrangement was unbiblical, because clearly the Bible did support that. Some people like to say, oh, that was the Old Testament, and then Jesus came along and he corrected all the mistakes in the Old Testament. I don't buy that at all. No, the same God who wrote the Old Testament wrote the New Testament, and if he approved of this particular, like I say, economic arrangement of the Jewish people, it is not in conflict with whatever the New Testament writers would say. The slavery of paganism, I'm going to get there in a second here. The slavery of paganism, let me just go through the rest of the notes, and then I'm only got didn't know I was going to take this long. I'll try to finish this off, and then maybe we have a few minutes to hit on some of these. So, in spite of the failures by, quote, Christians, the biblical worldview, and here's the point, no other worldview, it was the biblical worldview, no other worldview led to the abolition of slavery in England and America.
Absolutely.
We had a relapse.
Absolutely.
We had the 17th century falling into a practice that had been pretty much eliminated from Western civilization. But for the sake of money and through rationalizing and rejecting what the Bible really said, we fell back into it. But it was, in the end, it was the Christians who did triumph in abolishing slavery. For example, in Britain, it was William Wilberforce, 1833, the Abolition Act ended slavery in the British Empire. In the United States, the vast majority of the abolitionists, Harriet Beecher Stowe, William Lloyd Garrison, no, they weren't all, Baptists or Pentecostals, but they were basically Orthodox Christians. The vast majority of them, of the abolitionists, were Christians, and a huge number of them were actually clergy or pastors. So anyway, let me try and wind this up. My conclusion, okay? If it were not for the teaching of the Bible, slavery and racism would still be rampant in the world. No, racism still is strong, not in the way Black Lives Matter describe it, but some of reverse racism is. But anyway, slavery wouldn't if it weren't for Christianity, slavery would probably still be rampant. Okay, and why? Because no other worldview has the moral fortitude to abolish slavery, not the pagan or secular humanist worldview. At the time of Christ, 75% of the population of Athens were slaves. Over 50% of the population of the Roman Empire were slaves. The ruling class did no physical labor. In slavery in the ancient world was supported by the intellectual leaders of these cultures. It was approved by kings, priests, philosophers. Aristotle said slavery was natural, expedient, and just. He's a hero of the secular humanists. He's poster boy of secular humanism. And he also said a slave is a living tool, just as a tool is an inanimate slave. Therefore, there can be no friendship with a slave. One of the problems with all of this anti-Christian animosity is that they can't come up with an alternative. There's the pagan or secular humanist worldview would never have gotten rid of slavery, nor the Muslim worldview. Slavery was not abolished in Saudi Arabia until 1962. Slavery is still legal in the Sudan. Or the Hindu view. Slavery wasn't abolished in India until 1976. Nor in the atheistic worldviews. Communist Russia and Nazi Germany, they had slave concentration camps in the 20th century. So, contrary to the God-hating multiculturalist view, it was the teaching of the Bible that stood against slavery and led to its abolition. And the teaching of the Bible has the truth that can end racism. So, okay.